Imagineer Spotlight, Tony Baxter. Today, we are going to talk about Disney legend and Imagineer Tony Baxter right now. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Orange Grove 55. In this video, we are going to talk about Disney Imagineer and Disney legend, Mr. Tony Baxter, going over his career and everything to do with Mr. Baxter. But before we get into that, I want to introduce my dear friend and collaborator on the channel, Mr. Vash Sky. How you doing today, brother?
Doing very good. Happy to be here. Happy to be talking about this subject. This particular person is a big inspiration of mine, so I'm really happy to be here and contribute in any way I can.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. Let's dive right into the topic of Tony Baxter. So Tony Baxter, this is kind of like a kind of a cool story with him, because he started off as a submarine voyage ride operator, right? If I'm not mistaken. Like his career at Disney started off as a ride operator for the submarine voyage.
He the way he talks about it, and I did a little pregame just to get the facts right. He talks about starting off as an Autopia ride operator, actually. But generally speaking, Tomorrowland is kind of a shared pool of cast, right? You kind of go from attraction to attraction. So it's very possible that he submarine voyage was part of that. That sounds about right. I think it was, but he talks about fond memories mostly of at that time it would have been eventually Inner Space, and how that really influenced him. And really it speaks to the larger point about Tony Baxter and how he kind of diverges from maybe his predecessors in Imagineering at that time. You have to remember that Imagineering, when it was getting started up here, there were no rules for theme park design like what we would know today, right? They just kind of made the things that not only they wanted to create, that was in Walt's vision or was inspired by some other things, but what looked correct and proportionate and stuff like that. And even he talks about you wouldn't quite make Disneyland the way it's made today, or it was made back in '55 if you were making it today, right? Because you have so many more crowds to deal with, you have so many more things to contend with when it comes to a modern operating theme park, that they just didn't have to. A lot of it was just fly by night. A lot of it was just trial and error. A lot of it was just they were learning the rules for theme park design that would follow. But with the second generation, they were inspired by those things. They saw those things in a different light that maybe the first generation of Imagineers had. And so when the second generation was coming in, your Bruce Gordons, your Kevin Rafferty's, your Joe Rohde's, Tom Fitzgerald's, all these different people, they were inspired by what they saw from theme park design and really wanted to put their stamp on it. And that's where Tony's story kind of takes place. He talks about how he was fondly invited into Pirates of the Caribbean by Claude Coates at that time, when he was like a ice cream scoop / ride operator or whatever he was working on at the time, being invited down by Claude Coates as he was kind of scoping out the construction side of Pirates of the Caribbean. Claude Coates says, hey, you can't see it from that angle. You got to come down deep, and shown all these different things. And so he uses that kind of experience in his ride design going forward. So it's a very fascinating story about his humble beginnings.
And that's actually a perfect segue into what actually I was going to bring up right now. Learning the craft, essentially.
Yes.
And his big break kind of with Imagineering was Big Thunder.
Yeah.
That he was prior to Big Thunder, like you said, he was a cast member. He worked as a ride operator for you said Autopia and Submarine Voyage and what have you, but he wasn't into that behind creating the attractions quite yet. He was still kind of just that kind of that hourly cast member. But that changed pretty soon. Well, a little bit later, right? Mm-hmm. When he pitched the Big Thunder Mountain attraction.
Right.
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 And this is kind of cool because, like, you know, like as outsiders, we can't just pitch an idea to Disney. You know, legal, like they won't accept your ideas. But since he was on the in as a cast member, what have you, he was able to pitch this idea, and they loved it, and they went with it, and it became a pretty big staple of Disneyland Park. You know.
Oh well, absolutely, and it's kind of an interesting kind of journey to get to that point, because when he comes in, he's like a scrub, and so they have him doing all this kind of menial work for you know, when he initially joins Imagineering at that time. You have to understand, Walt Disney World's coming together. They need help wherever they can get it. And he starts slow under the tutelage of Claude Coates. It starts doing projects in various different places, and he really shows competency in his design in quite a few areas, and kind of not only builds experience for himself, but also shows himself off to be a very capable Imagineer that could handle a project like Big Thunder. So now when you have Mark Davis, and you know, it's Western River Expedition, and it's just this huge gargantuan exhibit of Imagineering prowess at that time, just this extremely expensive project. It would have been pretty much Pirates of the Caribbean 2.0 with this kind of Western River journey, you know, lower part of this attraction, which would have been a traditional boat ride, and then like a roller coaster on top, mine train right on top. Tony Baxter had the idea, hey, why don't we just go ahead and separate these things out? Not only from the aspect of you know, working on them as individual projects, which I believe Mark Davis, you know, kind of roped him in and said, hey, I need your help on this aspect of it. He separates that out and develops the Big Thunder project on its own, and really makes a name for himself by doing that, because you know, Space Mountain just comes up in 1975. They're obviously, you know, pretty excited about the idea of a roller coaster thrill type attraction for their parks, and they look at his concept, and it's like, I think it's the right track. I think it's where we want to go. And he tells these stories about how, you know, how he was hired by Imagineering in the first place was by this kind of contraption that he made using marbles or steel ball bearings. And it was so impressive to the Imagineers at the time, because it's this wonky, you know, machine type thing. And it's like, well, this is kind of really creative. So that taught him the elements that you need for roller coaster design, ironically enough. Wow. And so he was able to use that knowledge, that kind of firsthand experience with those marbles and steel ball bearings, and kind of get an approximation of what that track would be like for the Big Thunder project. You know, what kind of turns you could do, what kind of energy that you needed to have to get yourself to the track, so to speak. And so he was able to use his kind of theme design in conjunction with his firsthand experience to create kind of the foundations for that attraction and get that off the ground. You know, and it's turned into one of the most iconic attractions in theme park history, especially for Disneyland. It's the Bryce Canyon Buttes, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
They're so iconic, as nestled in between, you know, Frontierland and now Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and Fantasyland. It's just it's created. We talk about IP, right? It's like its own IP.
Oh yeah,
that kind of legendary status of attraction.
It is, and the thing I love about it too is, for those at home that are not aware, that Big Thunder replaced the old attraction that was there before it, Nature's Wonderland.
Yeah.
And Nature's Wonderland was kind of like this scenic. You know, you take a train through Frontierland, gorgeous. I mean, I've never ridden it; it was before my time. But yeah, I've seen videos and pictures like this where, you know, you just take this kind of like this mine train through these gorgeous, you know, scenic, just Nature's Wonderland, right? And the cool thing about what Tony did when he replaced Nature's Wonderland with Big Thunder is that he incorporated a lot of like that Nature's Wonderland DNA.
Yeah. Into
the attraction. Big Thunder in a lot of ways is like a living, breathing homage to that original attraction, but still Big Thunder does its own thing at the same time. You know, it has its foot in the past, but still is very much its own thing, which is when Disney does it right, that kind of mix is perfect. But yeah, I love how he handled that. I thought that was beautiful.
And you see Tony's style, particularly when it comes to Disneyland itself, because he grew up going to the parks regularly, right? There's that famous photo of him going to like Knott's Berry Farm and seeing the opening of the Timber Mountain Log Ride, like that. He was there for opening day. You see him in that opening day picture and so forth. He had a lot of reverence for these parks. So when it came to projects, particularly when they were in Disneyland proper, he imbued that kind of reverence on his projects. And it was always kind of this one step in the past, like let's honor the past but bring it these new experiences done in a new way for a new generation, right? So you see a lot of the some of the audio animatronics that were part of Nature's Wonderland brought into Big Thunder. And that's where a lot of like the kind of crude audio animatronic woodland creatures and animals and stuff like that, that's where they find a home in Big Thunder. So he was big on that. He was always kind of looking to like, hey, how can we incorporate the past into what we're doing going forward? Obviously, Mark Davis had a couple of pitches throughout the years to kind of update the attraction management in a new way, but he always wanted to honor what had come before. So it was really done particularly well. And let's not forget too. I was just thinking, he also has a little segment to the what is it, the paint pot section of the Mine Train, the Nature's Wonderland. What was it?
The Rainbow Caverns.
Rainbow Caverns, right? Rainbow Caverns. Sorry.
and folks, for those of you that are wondering what that is, when you're riding Big Thunder, I think it's the first lift hill.
Yes.
You're going up and you look to your left, and those gorgeous fountains, the color, they change color. Mm-hmm. Beautiful, just rainbow effect going on with the various. Are those like geysers? I'm not really sure exactly.
They're supposed to be. I think they're stalactites and stalagmites is what they're supposed to be, and while you would have geysers maybe in the area,
right,
the kind of inner cave structure would accumulate moisture and they're dripping through, and that's what's creating that effect. The Rainbow Caverns was unbelievable because, well, that's where the famous line from Walt says, hey, it's kind of fun to do the impossible. That's where that comes from, was from the Rainbow Cavern sequence, and how Claude Coates was able to have this waterfall constructed of paint of various colors. You had a red right next to green right next to blue right next to, all this stuff, kind of falling down, and a lot of experts were saying, hey, that's going to be brown in a week, kind of thing. And he was able to, with careful construction, keep those colors separate, illuminate them through blacklight, and it created this amazing effect that we've not seen replicated since, unfortunately. Wow. But that's the reference to that in Big Thunder. Always given reference to those things. Pretty cool.
And real quick before we move on to our next thing, there is actually a fun little homage to the Rainbow Caverns in Radiator Springs Racers. With was it the tail light caverns?
Tail light caverns, yeah.
Pretty cool, nice little nod. I love that. Absolutely love that. So very now, cool. Kind of moving forward with Tony's career, after Big Thunder, he tackled something even bigger. He tackled Fantasyland, and Fantasyland. This came in the early '80s. Now I'm going to share a picture, because I don't think a lot of our audience will even remember this. To be quite honest, it's such a long time ago. But this is what Disneyland's Fantasyland looked like prior to Tony Baxter's new Fantasyland. Mm-hmm. It was a very medieval kind of style, and it had a lot more carnival vibes to it than it does now. And he came in and he completely, he did, and to this day, I still think this is like his best work. He turned it into a quaint, charming, like kind of like a Pinocchio-inspired European village, which is kind of like quintessential Fantasyland. It kind of fits all the different stories in a way, He did a beautiful job with that. Much better, I think, than, look, this is what Walt Disney picked. And Walt Disney is icon, legend, genius, whatever you want to call him.
Mhm.
But I mean, hey, I still think that Tony Baxter's Fantasyland runs circles around what we see here. I absolutely
I
do.
agree. It was the quintessential Fantasyland in my eyes. We've seen new Fantasyland interpretations in various places around the world, obviously Shanghai and parts of Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom and so forth. But you look at this Fantasyland, this version of Fantasyland, the 1981, 1983 new Fantasyland, and it's just that perfect balance of charm, of kind of European inspiration mixed in with the kind of characterization as taken on by the IP. You have a mixture of architectural styles, but they're blended together really well. And we've seen Imagineering try this with various neighborhoods and so forth and not do a very successful job. This is how you do it, folks. It's just this kind of beautiful tapestry of these different styles that evoke charm, fantasy, these kind of European stories, and kind of blends them all together into this nice mashup. And it really is exquisite. The cobblestones, the oh man, it's like the kind of brickwork, the Tudor style in some places. It's just it's French kiss, beautiful.
It's beautiful. And I've always kind of said this, but when Disney renovates or reimagines an area,
yes,
and this new area becomes kind of like you can't picture it any other way. It becomes like kind of what's the word for it? Like it's always been this way, right?
Yeah.
And I'll even compare it to Buena Vista Street. Like when you walk into California Adventure, Buena Vista Street is very much like New Fantasyland, where it was the perfect reimagining to the point where you can't really imagine any other entrance to California Adventure at this point. It worked so perfectly that it almost like erases your memory of the old entrance.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Now that gap was much wider between what preceded it and Buena Vista Street in final, but you're exactly right. It not only does it feel like perfect, but it feels like it's always been there.
It's always been there. Exactly. And that's how you know Disney got it right. When it feels like it's always been there, they nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. This new Fantasyland was spot on A+.
It was, but I must warn you that when they did the demolition on what was a lot of people's favorite land, just in general, and completely demolished it and destroyed it. I mean, Bruce Gordon and Tony Baxter tell these stories about how they're standing in the rubble and they're just looking around, they're going, what have we done? It's like, because, you just see, lights that have been taken down, and you see the spark from the it's kind of the last beacon of life from the old Fantasyland, and you just go, are we really going to do this? They move the carousel out of that way, demolished everything, even demolished those ride buildings and so forth, tore into those, and rebuilt it from the ground up. And I must say, it provided just such a great, amazing, charming atmosphere that they were extremely proud of, and really was the impetus for Disneyland Paris. I think a lot of the design work was done there, almost brick for brick. They took a lot of inspiration from Storybook Land. And how some of those facades are actually done, like for example, the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. That facade was taken from Toad Hall, that was in Storybook Land previously, and so it does have its kind of origins in kind of Walt's day, but it's just done in such a beautiful way. Obviously, it was a perfect pick for Paris as well. So, but we got a little bit of it here, and it looks amazing.
It looks amazing. It really is the perfect aesthetics for Fantasyland. It's timeless. It's done in a way where it really, any kind of fairy tale or movie like that you want to put in there, it fits. It doesn't. It's not just so like tunnel vision with one IP, so to speak. It really does kind of bring them all together nicely in one unified vision. God, it's just flawless. It really is flawless what they did with that I
love it, man. I mean, it really is good, and it really it's nice because it sets our park apart a little bit.
Right.
You know, like you go to Walt Disney World and
they still have this kind of style.
they
right?
still have that kind of stuff. They do. And it's just like it just feels a little passe. I think Tokyo is actually worse in that respect a little bit because they they haven't changed much, modeling a lot of it off the Magic Kingdom and so forth. So it's just like it just doesn't feel like Fantasyland in the way this does. It just feels so organic. It just feels such a natural extension of Disneyland, and really it has become now the heart and soul of Disneyland, I think.
Oh yeah,
and anybody with young kids, you're gonna have to spend a lot of time in Fantasyland. You might as well have nice surroundings, and they do a good job here.
Absolutely. So, kind of pivoting now, kind of going down the timeline. The next big project for Tony was Splash Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Splash Mountain.
Splash Mountain. It's kind of an interesting one. It's an interesting one on a number of levels, because Splash Mountain. I mean, well, okay. I'll have you introduce it and then I'll talk about it. How about that? So give us the introduction on Splash Mountain.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think this is one of the, look, obviously this is Michael Eisner's era. Michael Eisner, he was kind of notorious for kind of seeking out what the competitors are doing and then being like, and then saying, hey, look, you know what? Do the Disney version. Right. We've seen this with, Disney MGM Studios, which is sort of basically like Disney's answer to like, Universal. Right. And Splash Mountain was very much like, hey, you know what? We don't have a flume ride. Disney or Imagineers, can you make that happen? And Tony was up to task, and I think it came out pretty damn good. I mean, I've always loved Splash Mountain as a great attraction. I love how they kind of not kind of, but they recycled the animatronics, the animals from America Sings that was in Tomorrowland, and they utilized those animatronics. That was fantastic. And, I think he did a phenomenal job on it. And he took an IP, it's based on a very controversial IP. Let's not sugarcoat,
It is. There's no question.
No question. And even back then, even Eisner had a little bit of like, it was kind of.
He did.
And in my opinion, and I might get heat for this, but I think that Tony and the team did a good job at sort of utilizing the story, but keeping the problematic elements out of it.
Right.
It's more focused on just the animals. So I don't know, but how you feel about Splash Mountain, Tony Baxter?
Like I really do like Splash Mountain quite a bit. Okay, I really do love this attraction. So many fond memories, so many good memories. I think we were just talking to one of the DMs that we have about how the music is just perfect. Yeah, like the ambient music is just perfect. The kind of the area music is just it's just perfection personified in audio form. It's just, I think it is really strong. Now the interesting thing about Splash Mountain is it was kind of covering a couple of problems, right? Because at the same time that Michael Eisner and honestly Dick Nunis was talking about it for years before even Michael Eisner got involved about we want to do a log flume attraction, and at the same time it was America Sings is closing. And then, a couple of years down the road, you have a new CEO come in. So it was a kind of a mixture of all these things that became Splash Mountain. And it was like, Tony's like, man, what am I going to do? I want to save America Sing. I want to save the American Sing audio-animatronics. There's some great audio-animatronics that would all be just lost. It was one of Mark Davis's last works for Disneyland proper. For the bicentennial and everything like that. And it's like, and Dick Nunis wants me to make this log flume. What is that going to be? At that time, let's be honest here. At that time, the studio, I think there were like 8 major studios at the time, and they were last. They didn't have IP, so to speak. They didn't have a lot of the, great stories that we recognize Disney for today. That didn't exist back in the 70s. So it was like, or 70s and 80s, what is that going to be? Like, what IP are we going to choose for this? And he's like, oh, that's perfect. Let's do Song of the South, specifically the animated portions of that, because those creatures that were designed for America Sings by Mark Davis kind of fit the animated style of the characters that you see in Song of the South. I believe Mark Davis may have contributed that in some way, animated-wise, for those, which is why the styles are very similar, right? So it's like, oh, perfect. I can save these animatronics and put them into this at that time's Zippity-Doo-Dah River Run, I believe is what it was called back then. But I can put them into this log flume ride for Dick Nunes. Develop those ideas in collaboration with Bruce Gordon and others, and the model sat kind of collecting dust until Michael Eisner comes in and says, I want to reinvigorate the parks. I want to reinvigorate Disneyland and Walt Disney World and make them attractive to younger guests. So he brings Michael Eisner famously brings his son, I believe it was Brent Eisner, I think, if I'm getting the name correct.
I'm not sure on that.
I'm not sure on the name either. I thought it was Brent or something like that. Anyway, he brings his I believe his oldest son at that time, brings him down and says, "Hey, I want your interpretation on some of these things that we're going to be pitched here." And his son sees the Splash Mountain model, is like, we gotta do this. This is what we gotta do,
Yeah.
And of course Michael Eisner's like, oh, that does look pretty attractive, and it's like, how much is that gonna cost? Ooh, that's a lot of money. And so there are some stories associated with that, but Splash Mountain was kind of the combination of all these revolving things, and really made the I think one of the finest attractions. I understand the subject matter is controversial, but I think, just the mixture of elements, outside of those things, I think it's one of the greatest attractions that Disney's ever done. And I think they did it even better, in my personal opinion, in Walt Disney World's version. With some other factors contributing to that. So it's really, really fantastic.
Yeah. And before we move on to the next thing, I do want to say that there is good news in regards to, because for those of you at home, you're aware that they are re-theming Splash Mountain to Princess and the Frog, and Tony is involved in that re-theming. So that is fantastic news. Tony does great work, so I think it'll.
Now, Splash Mountain opens July 17th, 1989. I think we might have missed an attraction that Tony Baxter heavily contributed on, and that was Star Tours in 1987.
Oh, you're right. Star Tours.
Right. Yeah, you got to do the. Wait. I might have the drop here. There you go, right there. Right.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome aboard. Star Tours is kind of that first wave of really kind of IP focused attractions. Again, it wasn't a Disney IP at that time, no. Star Wars, but Tony Baxter kind of had it in his mind where it was like the visionaries that were kind of Walt-esque at that time weren't coming from the studio; they were coming from other places.
Right.
And one of those, he felt the next Walt Disney was really George Lucas. Tony Baxter felt really strongly about that idea and was actually trying to convince Ron Miller to get to ally with George Lucas specifically, and I believe they actually had a meeting at Ron Miller and Diane Disney Miller. I believe they have a vineyard out in Napa Valley.
Wow!
At that time, and they had a meeting together to see if they could come together. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out, and obviously we know what happened with the executive structure at that point. But then when Michael Eisner came in, Tony Baxter pitches him the same idea. Hey, I think we should really do something with George Lucas. I think George Lucas is the guy that we should be creating, either attractions for the parks or even some kind of media entities for other places throughout the studio. And Michael Eisner's like, that's an amazing idea. So it was really kind of Tony Baxter kind of getting the ball rolling on this and getting George Lucas involved in a creative way throughout various segments of the studio.
Yeah, and Star Tours really represents that inclusion of like you said, like non-Disney franchises into Disneyland. Now, I gotta say, real quick before we pivot to Indiana Jones, yeah, if Twitter and the online community that currently exists right now existed back then, the outrage for that would have been through the freaking roof. You wouldn't even believe it.
Well, we know what that looks like because we saw it with Avatar,
right?
with James Cameron.
And we're even still seeing it with Marvel. Even though Disney outright owns Marvel, there's still a lot of fans who refuse to accept Marvel at the Disney parks, things like that. It's absolutely wild. Now, the next big thing in 1995 was the Indiana Jones Adventure. This was like the creme de la creme, the crown jewel of Tony's resume, I think. This was kind of like the Indiana Jones Adventure was really cool because it takes the whole idea of these immersive dark rides, these big elaborate dark rides like a Pirates of the Caribbean, like a Haunted Mansion, and brought it to the next generation. And it was like that next step. It reminded me very much of like what Disney Animation did with the Renaissance. Yeah. They took the Walt model of animation, what he was doing with animation, and it had its and they kept the DNA of what Walt did, but they elevated it. Yeah. And that's what Indiana Jones Adventure did. It took that same DNA that Mark Davis and Claude Coates and Walt Disney and all them, had, in those initial days or those initial years of Disneyland, and they catapulted it into the next generation with Indiana Jones Adventure. It's an absolute masterpiece.
An incredible attraction, also with its own design, ups and downs to it. The conceit was, Tony Baxter's kind of thinking, it's like, man, wouldn't it be cool if you could take a Star Tours type vehicle, right, a motion simulator, put it on wheels and wheel it through a very heavily themed environment like we would see in Pirates of the Caribbean, right? That was the kind of idea behind, the kind of the core design concept behind Indiana Jones. But also too, going back to the George Lucas story, Tony Baxter's a huge Indiana Jones fan. Oh yeah. When he saw Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time in theaters, he was really like taken away by what he saw in there. It's like, oh man, wouldn't it be awesome to create an attraction that could deliver the same kind of level of excitement and thrill for Disneyland? They actually had this conversation in the theater. Tony Baxter and a couple of other friends that they saw it with. They were just blown away by this. And it's like, man, that would be cool. So when when this kind of a meeting of the minds came with George Lucas and Michael Eisner and so forth, and getting them involved with Star Tours, it was like, wow, couldn't we do something with Indiana Jones? And using the kind of concept of this kind of motion simulator on wheels, that's where this kind of flows into. But man, that getting in Disneyland is also its own perilous journey because the operators of the park, they want something in Tomorrowland. It's like, this really belongs at Adventureland, but Adventureland's tiny, it's small. How do you fit
it's a walkway, basically.
Oh yeah, and it's at that time it's going to be one of the biggest show buildings, one of the biggest adventures they've ever done. And it's like, this is a hallway. This is if you think Avengers Campus is small, folks, Adventureland's not too far behind. It's very, very, it's tiny, right. And I believe between Simpson and Robinson Treehouse, right, and Jungle Cruise, where the entrance of this attraction is going to be, it's like 20 feet, I think, is what the dimensions are. And it's like, how are we going to do this? Well, we do it by extending it out into the parking lot. Right. And we're going to have this 1/4-mile long queue down, into this temple, right? And it's like, can we avoid that by some method? There was an idea of using the Jungle Cruise to ferry guests over there, because it was such a long walk, to do this.
That would be.
But it was like,
cool.
it would have been cool, and that's where you see that the great concept artwork with like the Jungle Cruise going through and the train going through and the roller coaster inside. It was just this amazing thing. Unfortunately, they had to pare it down, but Tony Baxter was smart. He was like, no, let's. You know what? If we're going to have a long queue like this, let's make it a design feature. Let's use this to set up the ride. And honestly, when it comes to Indiana Jones, a lot of it comes from that setup of just transporting you almost out, away from Disneyland, physically and thematically,
right,
and putting you in another time and place, and transporting into this adventure that completely is enveloping, that is completely immersive, and hypes you up for the experience ahead in just a beautiful way that has really, honestly, in my mind, has not really been replicated since.
No, exactly. They try to do it to some success with Galaxy's Edge. I think that whole the way you transition from like Disneyland proper into Galaxy's Edge, I think it was done masterfully.
Unbelievably well, yes.
Unbelievably well. But I would agree with you, though. I still think that Indiana Jones is still the king of the hill with that. I still think that.
Right?
Yeah. It's what? I'm sorry?
Oh, no, I'm just saying there's something about it, right? There's something about just the way they do it. And it was
just so perfect because you had those long hallways and then the room that comes down. It's
spikes.
Just so, the spikes and the way they really got you into that outside the berm, so to speak, was just beautiful. And Batu does a good job. But Indy is still the king.
I will say, Rise tries to do it. Rise gets close. I just don't think it's just as successful as Indiana Jones. And that might be due with the length of the queue and how much time they had to set up and some other design differences. Right now, I think Rise does a nice job of the juxtaposition of themes, where it's like you enter into this kind of temple thing and you end up on a Star Destroyer. Like that's a good juxtaposition of themes. But there is kind of this kind of quaint charm that Indiana Jones has, where you just go deeper in this temple. It's like, man, what is behind this corner? I remember as a kid, just like, oh my God, I can't wait to see what's down these routes, so to speak. And then you get up to the ride vehicles and it's like, oh, you're too short to ride. That was unfortunate. But I just look at those Jeeps going through for the time I couldn't actually go on this ride, and you just go like, man, what is around the bend? Where are these Jeeps going? And so the experience is unforgettable. I will say before one of the great stories I have is meeting Tony Baxter while he was walking into Indiana Jones through the exit.
Oh, nice.
And me walking, out of it and catching him there and having a little bit of discussion with him, like outside of Indiana Jones Adventure. That was pretty cool.
That's pretty incredible. That is pretty incredible. That's amazing. That's amazing. So now to kind of close out the conversation, there's one final thing I kind of want to discuss, and this is kind of a juicy one. New Tomorrowland. The new Tomorrowland.
Oh, boy.
1998's Tomorrowland. And so this was interesting because, look, folks, as you can see, Tony Baxter has an incredible career. The guy knows what he's doing. Between the new Fantasyland, Indiana Jones Adventure, Big Thunder, come on. I mean, Disneyland Paris, he knows what he's doing. But New Tomorrowland it premiered and it fell flat. Now, I will say this, and I think you probably agree with me, Dre, but we'll see. I think that this was really more of a budget cut thing than it was a design thing. I think what Tony had laid out, if you see some of that original New Tomorrowland artwork, it looks pretty incredible. Yeah. It looks pretty awesome. Mm-hmm. I think that we had a leadership. We had some leadership back then that was really bad. I mean, people think Chapek is bad right now. Bob Chapek is nothing compared to what we had back then with Paul Pressler. Yeah. This guy was the worst of the worst. Yeah. And I think that's really what did the New Tomorrowland in. I think if Tony was given, look, you have to balance the budget with the creatives. You can't just give them $3 billion to do whatever they want. Yeah. But at the same time, you have to give them enough to have a product that looks good and operates good and is appealing. And I don't think they gave him enough money to do what he needed to do. And that was really the death knell for New Tomorrowland, No,
I think you're absolutely right. Tony, he fought for quality, always fought for the kind of bigger budget, the better idea, so to speak. But it was time. It was a time in management at Disney and so forth that just it wasn't going to go his way. It was pretty
Right.
clear that was going to be the case. And at heart, he's a company man. You know, he's a guy that's going to go. He will play ball in order to get products done and moving forward. He was involved in California Venture famously, and but a lot of his contributions came from Westcott, which I have a little piece of audio that's pretty cool. But when it came to like New Tomorrowland, there was Tomorrowland 2055, which moved forward for quite a bit, and when those things got pulled out from underneath you, it's like, where do we go from here? Obviously, you do Discoveryland and Disneyland Paris, and it's like, okay, that might be a good fit for a more fantastical steampunk future. Unfortunately, they didn't get any of the fantastical steampunk budget to really fulfill it in the way that they could at Disneyland Paris previously, and really what it needed to really be 100% successful. And like you said, I mean, it was a budgetary thing. And I think at the time, there was some political maneuvering by some, and I think Tony Baxter was part of that to try to get this off the ground, but also try to deliver something that was the kind of the best it could, and unfortunately we're still living with the scars of that today in the form of rocket rods, for example, or Alien Pizza Planet and the Extinct Interventions building. We're still kind of living with some of the side effects from those decisions, unfortunately, and this is on the record.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate, because I think if you kind of let Tony go wild, the guy does amazing things. And like I said, I mean, there's always going to be a limit to that, like you can't just give, I support creatives 100%, but you can't, but at the same time, it is a business, and you can't just have a blank check, so I understand that, but that era though was really, really dark for Disneyland, and it really, they nickel and dimed way too much. At least with Bob Chapek, he has his black eyes when it comes to Imagineering, but but like you've said, and I've mentioned it too, like he's not completely averse to spending money. Like the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser is costing them an arm and a leg for. I mean, that's a high quality thing that they're building, and the Tron and the Cosmic Rewind over in Florida. He's not adverse to it. I think he just wants to know, if I'm going to spend X amount of dollars, I'm going to get my money back. Where Paul Pressler, he didn't want to spend anything. It was just cheap all the way through, So
and this is and some of Chapek's decisions are consistent with kind of an IP driven focus. It's going to benefit the company. It's going to be it's going to have synergy with the company. It's going to be based on properties that are very successful, and usually that amounts to the ride being very successful. So I think that's where his focus at. That's where his mindset's at. So I don't think he's averse to spending money. It's just it's got to be towards an end.
Right. Exactly. So overall, I'm a huge Tony Baxter fan. I think we both are with that. I think he's done amazing stuff. I'm glad to see him involved in this Splash Mountain retheme. So we'll see a little bit more of his work coming up with that. And any final thoughts on Tony before we get going here?
The only final thought I'll say is maybe we have to do a follow up on some of the other things about Tony, maybe doing a live show or something.
Oh yeah,
it doesn't have to be maybe its own episode, but maybe like going over some of his other projects internationally, or for the other parks, and maybe the Disneyland that never was, and some of the other projects that Discovery Bay and so forth. So I think that would be fun to do a follow up on this. But his career is storied. You got to give him that. So pretty cool. He deserves his window.
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. 100%. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Mr. Vashkai. Thank you, Dre, for coming on today. I do appreciate it. If you could let everybody at home know where they can find you on social media.
Best place to interact with me is at Twitter, at Vashkai. That is right there. And the best place to see me is on your channel, Orange Grove 55, at Freshly Squeezed, your source for juicy news and info, squeezed fresh right from the Grove. That's where I'm at.
That's where he's at. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on today, Dre. And thank you all for watching. So what are some of your favorite Tony Baxter attractions, lands, proposals, project, whatever. This is all about Tony. So comment below with anything, any comments you have in regards to the man, in regards to his work, whatever you want to talk about. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always, have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye-bye.